Hello, so today I'm going to be talking to you guys about spirit stones. A lot of people have been asking questions, how do we stone a player? Of course, there's not one answer for every single player in the game, but there are a set of rules that you're going to want to follow. So I'm going to explain the basics of how you would stone a player based on his position. I'm then going to do a second video where I'm just going to point out what unique stones there are, talk about them more in detail, and explain who and why you would use them on. So, I'm going to start from the simplest to the hardest. The easiest one is always going to be the goalkeeper. In my case, it's a Scylla. So, again, it's going to be different depending on your goalkeeper and depending on his color of slots. The first rule when you're setting up stones is you want the most rare stones. Not because rare means better, it does mean rare to get, but it means they have a bonus passive. For example, well, this one isn't rare, this one is rare. So imagine that you were forced to put a hype stone, especially in the prime slot, you would try to push towards something with a bonus passive. It's not the greatest passive in the game, but it doesn't hurt to have a bonus passive. And some of them are actually going to be extremely valuable. So, what I just want to point out is on a goalkeeper, there are a few stones you're going to be looking for mainly. This one actually has a pretty good examples of the kind of stones you're going to stick on goalkeepers. The first kind is going to be life. Any kind of life is fine. Again, those are usually the ones who block the extra slot. Don't put them in the primes. It's not worth it. But if you have, like, for example, free of a collar and you don't have any other defense type, throw that in. Second type is usually going to be the defense. So in my case, there is no special kind for light, but there are other options. This one has some really good substat. Decrease inflicted damage by 10% is something you're going to be looking for in goalkeepers. The next one is usually going to be a legendary stone. Well, unique, depending on how you want to call them. As I only have light slots anyway, I threw in a Normalization who increases hype and critical resistance. There are a few defensive stones depending on your element. So again, you won't just be able to stick that one in, but you can only have one unique stone and you can't have a dupe of what kind of base stone it was based on. Luckily for me, this is not based on a hype or defense stone. Don't ask me the logic behind that, but that's just how it works. If you were, for example, to want to throw in a POL who's based on a hype stone, that wouldn't work. And the prime slot, you're going to try to throw again something that's rare because you can. So always throw rare in the prime. And for a goalkeeper, again, it's up to you. Decrease inflicted damage, recovery power. So I'm just going to look at them now from the player book aspect. In the prime slot, especially for goalkeeper, there's one stone that actually is better than basically all of them. For a goalkeeper, again, I'm being specific here. So you're going to want to throw in this one, Ice Score of Eternity, because it's going to increase critical resistance. So for that prime slot, if you have this, this is a great fit, irrelevant of your goalkeeper, because critical resistance is something major in the game, especially in PvP. And then you're going to be looking around what kind of defensive stones. Do never give your goalkeeper speed, reflex, none of those things matter. The only thing, if you were forced to give it to your goalkeeper, it would be pass effect. And even then, I would still not advise it. Now, if we look at it, just a fast overview on a unique stone side. Dark-wise, there's nothing. Light-wise, there's Normalization. Wormwind-wise, there's Protection of Mother Earth, decreased damage, increased critical resistance. In my eyes, this is the best unique stone for a goalkeeper. Sadly, I can't equip it because it's Wormwind. And you cannot put unique stones in your prime slot. In the Thunder, there's this one. In PvP, it's just not interesting. Because recovering hype is divided by 2. It's not going to be something that's valuable on the long run. In PvE, it can actually be valuable. And Android, there's nothing. So basically, there are 3 good defensive stones. So you're going to wish that your goalkeeper has one of those collars. And they're very easy to find because they're just in a line. Now, I'm going to go back to the positions. Then we have the back line. Well, let's find a good example. So in a back line, you're going to want to stack different things depending on where they're placed and what roles you want to give them. On average, what you're going to be having is some totems and some stealers. And then a few players are going to have specific setups that are specific to their skill set. So those ones are going to be exceptions. An example of an exception, I'm just going to overlook it fast, is Leah, because her power actually comes from the amount of life she has. So you have to give her a POL, you have to give her a life stone, reflex doesn't hurt, and you give her a speed for counterattack resistance. Now, if you don't have her, what you're going to try to do is going to be a little bit more similar to this Magnus. You always want to have 2 reflex stones, ideally light and Andor, because those are the 2 ones of the passives. So recovering spirit when you counterattack, it's pretty nice, and critical resistance is even better. So if it's a backline, you want it to be an Andor stone. If it's a midline, it's a bit more technical, because they're sometimes just going to want to do some spirit generation. But again, if your backline is weak, putting an Andor one is better in the prime slot. Now again, this is usually what you're going to find in most prime slot, and it's just really good altogether. Reflex allows you to just steal the ball and walk away. Just be careful, because certain strikers have actually alarming high amounts of reflex. So for example, if you feel like stealing from Avanchi, don't do it. He will terminate your players, and a lot of players are going to suicide trying to steal from Avanchi. I've actually seen 4 players get destroyed trying to steal from Avanchi, who was completely ironic, knowing I hadn't even acted yet. Now, in the back line, what you're going to want to do again, especially if they're on one of the 2 sides, because that's where the striker is going to be shooting from, you're going to want, if possible, to throw another form of defensive stone. Decreased damage inflicted is the most popular one, but if you don't have it, it's not that big of a deal. Just throw a defense, anything of survival. You can even throw a hype stone depending on their passives. So going to be 2 reflex, something defensive, and if you can, what's really nice is to throw something for speed. Again, if you can, throw a Wormwind or a Dark, they both have great passives. The secondary passives I'm talking about. Now, again, action speed is good because from the point that they're in the line, you want to actually try to outspeed them first so you can actually attack and then out-reflex them. Because the front line is going to be more based from the passers on a pass power and from the striker on a dribble. So they're not reflex resistant. The idea is always to steal before the striker holds the ball. If the striker has shot and it is now your turn, passing it in front of him and trying to penetrate him is usually a good move. Again, it will depend the kind of buffs the striker has. Some strikers have increased attack power and some strikers only have dribble or whiff a shot. So you want to actually read the skills of the passers in advance to know which ones you can and cannot do this on. And what you're going to have usually in center mid of the back line is going to be a penetrator. So they're going to usually have a little bit of a different skill setup. You might even want to throw in some sort of penetration stone. It's going to be 2 reflex. They're not going to be going for defensive stone. They're going to be throwing in some sort of penetration or critical damage or crit stone in the middle. So it's a little bit more power rated because the idea is just to get the ball out of there. Now on the midline, there are 2 types of position. The very first one is going to be center mid. There are very few players who can run this position in a logical way. So it's because you need certain passives that are going to give you back life or going to make you more resistance. On the legendary plant, Metatron and Beth are basically the best center mids you're going to get. On the non-legendary plants, there are some. There's, for example, in the Wormwind, I think it's called Limily. I know in the Light, there's Sammy. I know there's one in Andor whose name I keep forgetting. There are a few of them, so you're not locked on a legend basis, but you want to be sure it's one of those players, especially if they have a skill who activates when being attacked. That's a key thing for a player, and they need to have a high reflex count. So you're always going to be giving them 2 reflex stones irrelevantly. Now in my case, this is badly set up, so do not take me as a reference for the remaining 2. They're actually powerful because of their passives. But taking this one for example, again, as you've noticed, I've thrown an Andor reflex for the critical resistance. I've thrown a light reflex for the spirit generation. And what you're going to want to do is get some things to make you resistant or to do high damage. In this case, there's a penetration who's more for the damage, and there's this will be futurely changed for a battalion. I've sadly had not a good luck trying to get it from the evolutions of stones, but this will be changed. So the idea is that player is not as much of a damage player, he's a ball holder. So you can throw him some decreased damage, you're going to put him the 2 reflex stones, you're going to give something for damage and something for decreased damage in the other 2 slots. These players must have high base reflexes. That is a must, and they must be part of the list of center mid characters. If it's not one of those, they will be penetrated, especially if the other line has good speed, 4 players, and they act before you, who will happen fairly often when you're facing certain build teams. Now, for the 2 sides, depending on the way you play, you can do it a little bit different. That's where there starts being a little bit more of a choice. There are 2 builds possible, actually 3 of them. You can build them for pure raw damage. If you do this, you can actually throw away all the reflex stones. An example of this would be, for example, Malcolm, who actually has no reflex stone whatsoever. But the thing is that he has a dark speed stone, giving him counterattack resistance. When you have this, you cannot be reflexed. So it's actually a decent option if you want to more push on the idea of KOing the player instead of reflexing them. So this can be built on a steel base or a penetration base. On this example, he is more based on a penetration base, as he has a penetration dribble, he has an actual penetration again. So you see counterattack resistance 22%, counterattack resistance 28%. When he's going to be penetrating, he has over 50% of counterattack resistance, meaning he won't be stolen. So this is really good for dark players. You're going to see that build more commonly in the dark ones, because they have those 2 dark slots. That's the ideal. I'd say the best for this is actually going to be to have 2 darks and 1 light for the light dribble, who on top of it would heal you. My center slot is actually because when I started using him, he was extremely weak to damage. So I've actually decided to throw a decreased damage like this. When he doesn't have the ball, they have a tougher time trying to take him out. Then they pass, they try to penetrate Metatron, and it heals him back up. So that is the damage idea, and if you wanted to make it on a steel build, all you'd have to do is replace this with a steel. Ideally, one of the 2 special steels that generate spirit or anything like that. So this is what you're mainly going to be looking for if you're not building him on a reflex based. Now sadly, that's not usually how players pull it off, because endgame wise, this is very viable, but you can usually people just want reflex. They're gonna have 4 reflex totems in there. They know they're gonna get reflex. So again, the 2 reflex stones, light and Andor. If you can't, put another element in your line, but at least put the center one Andor. Then you're gonna want for the 2 remaining stones on average to have some sort of speedish stone, ideally a dark one, or a Wormwind one, again for resistance. And on the side, you're going to actually want to push towards penetration. So that's again a very similar build from these guys. The only difference is you're not going to be pushing as much on defensive stones unless they're center mid. Here you have the option to just have raw damage. Here it's not as viable, so you're going to be more often trying to out-reflex them, as front lines have very low reflex, because this is not something they invest in. And now the front line, in our case again, like I said, they don't have high reflex, and we're not going to have it either. This is a utility strike line, so it's a little bit different, but on a line, you're going to have usually 3 players. First, you're going to have the striker. The striker does not care about anything except the fact of shooting. So he's going to have a pass receive, another pass receive, especially this one gives crit. This is considered the best prime slot for a striker, unless he follows certain specific conditions. But if he doesn't, this is the best prime slot. Then you're going to be giving him whatever best element, unique stone you can give him. Pterodac's Blood on a Vanchi is great because Vanchi will always crit. So you're going to want to increase his attack power even more. But there are a lot of other players of this. And the reason why this is a speed stone, who is by the way not the optimal setup for a regular striker, but only works because I'm running a Vonchi. On striker, passive-wise, you can look for some penetration, crit rate, crit damage, dribble. Those are the 4 stats you look for. The other ones are bonuses, but ideally none of that, and 10% in all of the other ones I mentioned is magical. Now, some people have shown some ultimate stones with even more than that. If you're really lucky, good for you. Sadly, not all of us are. They're usually rare stones to start with, so especially your unique stone, I'm sadly going to say re-rolling the properties might even sometimes be an option. Again, it's really an iffy question because it's going to cost you an average of 6 million to get a new stone. So, do you want to spend 6 million or 30 dimension stones? This might be one of the only uses of dimension stones, except from the legendaries players, that might actually be worth something. Because again, you don't choose what unique stone you're going to get. So after spending 6 millions, you might end up with a stone who you already had better than the one you're going to get. Next is the passer. Mine is built in the passer ideal, the worst you could ever imagine, as he literally has no pass stone. So, ignoring how mine is set up so bad, what you're going to be wanting to pull on a passer, I'm actually going to show this in the book because it's easier that way, you're going to want to throw him with some pass stones. The stones are the ones who look like a pointy arrow. I know they're not made the most logical signs on stones, but that's just how it works. So you're gonna wanna throw one of these. For the prime slot again, the Andor is the only special one. So you're always gonna be throwing this one, and on top of it, it's gonna recover a bonus spirit. Just like this, you're sure your striker can use his active. When you have a one-hit KO striker, having an ignition catalyst somewhere back in the game, or when you're using a 2-passer front, can be very interesting, because it's going to increase the entire team's pass effect. Using more than one is not worth it, as they will not stack. So only one player out of the 11 needs to be holding this. Do not think stacking 10 of them will be a valuable thing. The players will get the bonus action start, but that is all. Now, again, you're going to be running this. You're going to want to have 2 pass stones. Whatever pass stone your element has, you're going to be throwing this in. If you're unlucky, some players sadly have really bad elements pass-wise. As you've noticed, Light has no pass stone. Thunder has no pass stone. So you're going to hope that you have a good slot setup. Ideally, the Andor has pass, the Wormwind, and the Dark have pass stones. Andor's the best, but the other 2, whatever your element is, put one of those, put this in the prime slot, and you're going to want to throw in a speed stone, because not only do you want to pass, but you want to pass fast, because a lot of the time that's going to be the problem. And then the next stone you're going to want to do, this is going to depend on what your build is. You have multiple options. This is the remaining stone that you have. You have 2 passes, you have 1 speed, you can't do any more of the speed, you can't do any more of the pass. So what you're going to do is you're going to look at either a reflex stone. It's going to be depending on your element. So if you're Andor, if you're Light, you're going to throw in a reflex stone. If you're not, then you're going to start looking at other options. For example, steel stones. Again, a lot of the times you're going to want to make survival. Let me try to steal the ball back. So a Wormwind one is nice because it's going to recover some of the inflicted damage. The Dark one is instead going to recover some of the spirit. It really is depending on what you're aiming for and what your colors are. But those are the things you're going to be looking for. Now, especially since there has been this passer nerf, the front line, now we have attackers. The idea of an attacker is going to be an actually dedicated player to stealing the ball. Now, this is because Milky Way has an active that stacks on usage. So you could try to make something with a high action bar, throwing a Thunder penetration somewhere in the mix. Now, this is not exactly the ideal setup, but based on this, again, in Soccer Spirit, your objective is always to act before the enemy. So anywhere on any line except the goalkeeper, throwing one of the 2 speed stones in one of the slots, if possible, is always a great idea. You can throw a Thunder penetration. and a reflex stone, an extra reflex stone. Or even if you feel lucky, you can decide to throw two stones to steal, one reflex. Those are basically the free stones you're going to be trying to push towards. Again, a lot of players are going to have specific builds, as example Milky Way, but you got to understand that this is on a very general, broad sense of the term. And always you're going to be looking at the unique stones, what colors they have, and how you can max them out. Just remember that when you're looking at your stones, you got to look at the passives of your player, at the line buffs, and make sure you're not over buffing something that would make no sense. I'm going to take a very basic example. If you have a very fast line with 2 to 3 speed totems, adding some more speed in your passive stats of your stone will not give any value and might even reach the cap. But instead, if you were to add reflex, as there doesn't seem to be a cap to that, that would be more interesting. So again, you want to look at what your line has, what your stats are, and what would be the most beneficial thing to apply. But I hope this has given a basic understanding of what people are looking for when they're building players. Again, I'm not going to stress enough, there's also the individual base, if they're utility, if they're one-hit KO front lines, what exactly are their skills, and how your team works. So if you have any more on a specific base questions, look at the player overviews or ask me a question, I can answer those. But this is, again, in a general sense of the way, especially when you're beginning the game and you want to know, okay, I just got this stone, I have no stone, who the hell can I throw in this guy? So I hope you have enjoyed this video, and I'm going to make a second one talking a little bit more in detail about the unique stones. So if you're still having questions about those, I'd advise also watching that one.